The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped out of her rental car. She wore civilian clothes, a simple blue blazer and khaki pants, deliberately choosing to blend in rather than announce her presence. At 34, she had learned the value of observing before being observed. The invitation to speak at the joint military exercise had come as a surprise. Sarah rarely accepted speaking engagements, preferring the quiet intensity of her regular duties. But Admiral Morrison had been persistent, explaining that her expertise in cyber warfare and military strategy would benefit the elite unit's gathering for the 2-week intensive training program. As she walked toward the main building, Sarah noticed clusters of military personnel engaged in animated discussions. The energy was palpable. This was clearly an important event bringing together some of the military's finest. She recognized uniforms from different branches: Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Pararescue, and Navy SEALs. The registration desk was managed by a young corporal who looked barely old enough to shave. He squinted at his computer screen, then at Sarah, then back at the screen with obvious confusion. "Ma'am, I'm having trouble finding your registration. Could you spell your last name again?" Sarah spelled it out patiently. She had dealt with administrative mix-ups countless times throughout her career. Military bureaucracy was notoriously complex, especially when it came to joint operations involving multiple branches. "I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing you in our system. Are you sure you're supposed to be here today?" Before Sarah could respond, a voice boomed from behind her. "Hey, lady, you lost or something?" She turned to see a tall, muscular man approaching with an easy swagger that screamed special operations. His fatigues were crisp, his boots polished to perfection, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to command. The trident insignia on his uniform identified him as a Navy SEAL. "This is a restricted military facility," he continued, his tone friendly but firm. "Civilians aren't allowed past this point without proper escort." Sarah smiled politely. "I'm here for the strategic briefing session. There seems to be some confusion with the registration system." The SEAL laughed, not unkindly. "Strategic briefing? That's for senior military personnel only. Are you maybe looking for the Family Day event? That's next weekend." Several other service members had gathered around, drawn by the conversation. Sarah could see them exchanging glances and barely suppressed grins. To them, she was clearly a lost civilian who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said calmly, "but I assure you I'm supposed to be here. Perhaps if you could direct me to someone who can help resolve this registration issue." The SEAL's grin widened. He was clearly enjoying himself now. "Tell you what, let me help you out here. What's your rank? That way I'll know who to contact to get you sorted." The question hung in the air. Around them, conversations had quieted as more personnel became aware of the exchange. Sarah could feel eyes on her, waiting for her response. She had faced this situation many times throughout her career. People made assumptions based on her appearance, her age, her gender. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was simply to answer the question directly and let the chips fall where they may. "Colonel," she said quietly. The SEAL's expression froze. The easy confidence drained from his face as the implications hit him. Around them, the gathered service members suddenly straightened, uncertainty replacing their earlier amusement. "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that," the SEAL said, his voice notably less casual than before. "Colonel Sarah Chen, United States Army," she repeated clearly. "I'm here to conduct briefings on cyber warfare integration with special operations units." The silence that followed was deafening. The young corporal at the registration desk had stopped typing altogether, his hands hovering over the keyboard as he stared at his screen. Other personnel who had been watching the exchange were now studying their boots with sudden intensity. The SEAL who had initially approached her looked as though he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. His face had gone through several shades of red as he processed the fact that he had just challenged a superior officer and essentially accused her of being in the wrong place. "Ma'am, Colonel, I apologize. I had no idea. Your civilian clothes," he stammered. Sarah raised a hand to stop his explanation. "It's perfectly understandable, Petty Officer." "Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, ma'am, SEAL Team 7. Well, Petty Officer Rodriguez, you were doing your job by questioning an unidentified person in a secure area. That's exactly what you should do. However, next time you might want to verify someone's credentials before making assumptions about their authorization to be here." The gathering crowd was growing larger. Word was spreading quickly through the facility that something significant was happening at the registration desk. Sarah could see more senior personnel beginning to take notice and move in their direction. "Now," she continued, addressing the still flustered corporal, "let's see if we can sort out this registration issue. I suspect I might be listed under a different category or classification level." The corporal's fingers flew over the keyboard with renewed urgency. "Yes, ma'am. Let me check the VIP briefer list. And the senior officer section." As he typed, Sarah became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere around them. The casual chatter that had filled the registration area moments before had been replaced by hushed whispers and the sound of boots snapping together as more personnel realized they were in the presence of a senior officer. "Here you are, Colonel Chen," the corporal exclaimed with obvious relief. "You're listed under Special Advisory Personnel with a security clearance level that requires—" "Oh my, that requires General Officer notification of your arrival." Sarah nodded. That would explain the confusion. Those classifications aren't always clearly marked in the standard registration system. Behind her, Petty Officer Rodriguez was still standing rigidly at attention, clearly mortified by his earlier assumptions. Sarah turned to address him directly. "Petty Officer Rodriguez, I want you to remember something. Your instinct to challenge an unknown person in a secure area was correct. Your mistake was in making assumptions rather than asking direct questions. In special operations, those kinds of assumptions can be dangerous. Use this as a learning experience." "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, ma'am." The corporal was now frantically making phone calls, trying to reach the appropriate personnel to announce Colonel Chen's arrival. Sarah could hear fragments of his conversations as he worked his way up the chain of command. "Yes, sir, she's here now." "No, sir. She's been here for about 10 minutes. "Yes, sir. There was a registration mix-up." "No, sir. I don't think she's upset, but—" As word spread through the facility, Sarah noticed a ripple effect. Personnel who had been going about their normal routines were suddenly moving with more purpose, their posture straighter, their movements more precise. The arrival of a senior officer always had this effect, especially one who had appeared unexpectedly. What struck Sarah most, however, was the genuine professionalism she observed once the initial confusion had been cleared up. These were elite military personnel, and despite the awkward beginning, they were adapting quickly to the situation. She pulled out her phone to review her schedule while waiting for the registration issue to be fully resolved. The first briefing wasn't scheduled to start for another hour, which gave her time to meet with the exercise commanders and get oriented to the facility. The morning's incident would likely become a story that followed Petty Officer Rodriguez for quite some time. In military culture, such encounters often became legendary, passed down through units as cautionary tales or sources of good-natured ribbing. Sarah hoped he would take it in stride and use it as Rodriguez had suggested, as a learning experience. As she waited, Sarah reflected on the broader implications of what had just occurred. Despite decades of progress, female officers still faced assumptions and challenges that their male counterparts rarely encountered. The automatic assumption that she couldn't be a senior military officer simply because she was a woman in civilian clothes spoke to biases that persisted throughout the military culture. However, she also recognized the genuine respect and professionalism that had emerged once her rank and credentials were established. The military had made significant strides in creating an environment where merit and achievement were recognized regardless of gender. She had built her career on competence and results, and that foundation had served her well. The phone calls behind the registration desk were becoming more urgent. Sarah could hear the corporal explaining the situation to what sounded like increasingly senior personnel. Each conversation seemed to generate more concern about the protocol breach and the need to properly welcome a visiting colonel. She made a mental note to address this in her opening remarks. Military protocol existed for good reasons, but it should never become so rigid that it prevented the kind of honest mistakes that were bound to occur in complex, multi-unit operations. The key was learning from those mistakes and using them to improve procedures going forward. 20 minutes after the registration incident, Sarah found herself being escorted through the main corridor by a nervous lieutenant who kept apologizing for the earlier confusion. The facility was impressive. State-of-the-art training equipment, briefing rooms fitted with the latest technology, and personnel who moved with the precision that came from years of elite training. As they walked, Sarah noticed the ripple effect her presence was creating. Word of the morning's mix-up had spread quickly through the facility, and she could see personnel straightening up and offering respectful nods as she passed. The military grapevine was notoriously efficient, and she was certain that every detail of her encounter with Petty Officer Rodriguez had already been embellished and shared throughout the compound. "Colonel Chen, the exercise commanders are waiting for you in Conference Room Alpha," the lieutenant informed her. "General Patterson wanted to personally apologize for the registration error and ensure that everything is properly arranged for your briefings." Sarah nodded, appreciating the professional response. She had worked with General Patterson before on cybersecurity initiatives and knew him to be a competent leader who valued expertise regardless of its source. The conference room doors opened to reveal a gathering that made Sarah pause momentarily. Standing around a large tactical table were not just the expected exercise commanders, but what appeared to be the entire senior leadership of the joint training operation. The sight that greeted her was unprecedented in her experience, a room full of senior officers who had clearly interrupted their morning activities to address the protocol breach. General Patterson, a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, stepped forward immediately. "Colonel Chen, I want to personally apologize for this morning's incident. There's absolutely no excuse for the confusion with your registration or the treatment you received upon arrival." Before Sarah could respond, she became aware of movement throughout the room. What happened next would be seared into her memory forever and into the memory of every person present. 4 individuals stepped forward from the group gathered around the table. Sarah recognized them immediately. Their rank insignia and bearing marked them unmistakably as general officers. General Patterson himself, General Martinez from the Marine Corps, General Thompson from the Air Force, and General Williams from Army Special Operations Command. In a moment that seemed to unfold in slow motion, all 4 generals moved into position and rendered crisp, synchronized salutes. The gesture was so unexpected, so unprecedented in Sarah's experience, that for a moment she was too stunned to respond. The silence in the room was absolute. Every other officer present stood frozen, witnessing something extraordinary. General officers didn't typically salute colonels. The reverse was standard protocol. Yet here were 4 of the military's most senior leaders showing a level of respect that went far beyond normal military courtesy. Sarah recovered quickly from her surprise and returned the salute with equal precision. As hands dropped back to sides, General Patterson stepped forward to explain. "Colonel Chen, what happened this morning was unacceptable, but it also provided us with an opportunity to make something clear to everyone present. Your contributions to military cybersecurity have saved countless lives and protected operations that these gentlemen and their units have conducted around the world. General Martinez, a compact man with intense eyes, nodded his agreement. Colonel, your cyber warfare protocols have become standard operating procedure for Marine Special Operations. When my Marines go into hostile territory, they're protected by systems you helped design. General Thompson, whose Air Force background was evident in his precise bearing, added, "The integration protocols you developed have revolutionized how we coordinate between air and ground cyber assets. Our pilots are alive today because of innovations you pioneered." General Williams, whose Army Special Operations Command oversaw some of the military's most sensitive missions, stepped closer. "Ma'am, I've personally briefed the President on operations that succeeded because of your strategic insights. Your work operates at a classification level that most people in this room don't have access to." Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment at the public praise. She had always preferred to let her work speak for itself, and the attention was making her uncomfortable. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your kind words, but I was simply doing my job, the same job that everyone in this room does, serving our country to the best of our abilities." General Patterson smiled at her response. "That humility is exactly why you've earned this level of respect, Colonel. But I want everyone here to understand something important. Colonel Chen holds security clearances that exceed those of most people in this room. She has advised at the highest levels of government and military command. When she speaks about cyber warfare and strategic integration, she's drawing from experience that very few people in the world possess." The weight of this revelation was visible on the faces of the officers present. Petty Officer Rodriguez, who had been summoned to the meeting as part of the protocol review, looked as though he might faint. The realization that he had challenged someone whose security clearance and operational authority exceeded that of most generals was clearly overwhelming. "Now," General Patterson continued, addressing the room, "let's talk about what happened this morning. Petty Officer Rodriguez followed proper security protocols by questioning an unknown person in a restricted area. His error was in making assumptions rather than following proper identification procedures. This is actually an excellent teaching moment for all of us." Sarah seized the opportunity to address the broader group. "If I may, General, I'd like to say something to everyone here. What happened this morning wasn't a failure of security or protocol. It was a reminder that assumptions can be dangerous in military operations. Petty Officer Rodriguez was doing his job by questioning my presence. Where things went wrong was when assumptions were made based on appearance rather than credentials." She looked directly at Rodriguez, who was standing rigidly at attention. "Petty Officer, in special operations, the ability to question assumptions can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Use this experience to remember that things aren't always what they appear to be." "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied, his voice barely above a whisper. General Martinez stepped forward. "This incident actually highlights something we've been discussing in our morning briefings. In modern warfare, our most valuable assets don't always look like traditional military personnel. Some of our most effective operators are individuals who can blend into civilian populations or operate in environments where military bearing would be a liability." The discussion that followed was enlightening for everyone present. The general shared examples of operations where success had depended on personnel who didn't fit traditional military stereotypes. Sarah found herself drawn into a conversation about how cyber warfare was changing not just military technology, but military culture itself. "The future of special operations," General Thompson observed, "will increasingly depend on individuals who can operate in multiple domains simultaneously: physical, digital, and social. Colonel Chen represents exactly this kind of multi-domain expertise." As the meeting progressed, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in the room's dynamic. The initial tension and embarrassment from the morning's incident was being replaced by genuine intellectual engagement. The officers present were beginning to understand not just her credentials, but the broader implications of what she represented for military evolution. General Williams made an observation that resonated throughout the room. We often talk about thinking outside the box in military strategy, but we sometimes fail to apply that same flexibility to our assumptions about military personnel. Today's incident is a reminder that our most valuable assets might not always announce themselves in traditional ways. Sarah appreciated the way the senior leadership was framing the morning's events. Rather than simply disciplining the personnel involved, they were using it as an opportunity for education and reflection. This approach was characteristic of effective military leadership, taking unexpected situations and extracting maximum learning value from them. The meeting concluded with General Patterson outlining the schedule for Sarah's briefings and ensuring that all necessary support would be provided. As the room began to empty, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred. The four-general salute would undoubtedly become legendary within military circles. It was unprecedented in her experience and represented a level of public recognition that made her slightly uncomfortable. She had always preferred to work behind the scenes, letting her results speak for themselves rather than seeking personal recognition. However, she also recognized the broader significance of the gesture. In a military culture that still struggled with issues of gender equality and recognition, the public display of respect from such senior leadership sent a powerful message about merit-based advancement and the value of expertise, regardless of its source. The afternoon briefing session was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military career. Word of the morning's events had spread throughout the entire facility, and the auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Personnel who weren't normally included in strategic briefings had found reasons to attend, and Sarah could see faces peering in through doorway windows. As she walked to the podium, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. 300 elite military personnel rose to their feet in unison, creating a thunderous sound of chairs scraping and boots coming together. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 2 minutes, and Sarah could see genuine respect and curiosity in the faces looking back at her. "Please be seated," she said, once the applause died down. "I'm not here to be celebrated. I'm here to share information that could save your lives and help you complete your missions more effectively." The directness of her opening immediately captured the room's attention. These were practical people who valued substance over ceremony, and Sarah's no-nonsense approach resonated immediately. "This morning's incident at registration has become quite the topic of conversation," she began, drawing chuckles from the audience. "But I want to use it to illustrate something important about modern warfare. In cyber operations, things are rarely what they appear to be. A seemingly innocent email can be a weapon. A helpful civilian might be an enemy operative. A person in civilian clothes at a military facility might be a colonel with information that could change how you conduct operations." She clicked to her first slide, which showed a complex network diagram. "What you're looking at is the cyber infrastructure that supported Operation Neptune Shield, a mission that most of you participated in or supported 6 months ago. What you probably didn't know is that the mission almost failed because of assumptions made about cybersecurity protocols." The room was absolutely silent. Neptune Shield had been a highly successful joint operation, and the suggestion that it had nearly failed was shocking to the personnel who had participated. "The enemy had infiltrated our communications network 3 days before the operation began. They knew our insertion points, our extraction plans, our backup protocols. They were prepared to counter every move we had planned." Sarah paused to let this sink in. "The only reason the mission succeeded is that we identified the breach and fed them false information for the final 48 hours. Hands shot up throughout the auditorium. Sarah could see the questions forming. How had the breach occurred? How had it been detected? What measures were in place to prevent similar incidents? "The breach occurred because someone made an assumption," she continued. A trusted contractor had been working with military networks for over a decade. Their security clearance was current, their background was clean, their work was exemplary. The assumption was that this track record guaranteed continued trustworthiness. That assumption nearly cost 37 lives. The implications were staggering. Sarah could see officers mentally reviewing their own operations, wondering what assumptions they might have made that could prove equally dangerous. Modern warfare requires us to question everything, trust but verify continuously, and remain adaptable to threats that don't fit traditional patterns. This morning, Petty Officer Rodriguez questioned my presence here. That was exactly what he should have done. Where the process broke down was when assumptions were made based on appearance rather than verification of credentials. She spent the next hour walking through case studies of cyber operations that had succeeded or failed based on the ability to question assumptions. The audience was completely engaged, asking detailed questions about implementation strategies and requesting specific examples they could apply to their own units. During the break between sessions, Sarah was approached by Petty Officer Rodriguez. He still looked uncomfortable, but had clearly gathered the courage to speak with her directly. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize again for this morning. I've been thinking about what you said about assumptions, and I realize I made several that I shouldn't have." Sarah studied his face carefully. "What assumptions did you make, Petty Officer?" "I assumed you couldn't be military because you were dressed in civilian clothes. I assumed you couldn't be a senior officer because of how you looked. And I assumed I could determine your authorization level without actually checking your credentials." "Those are honest observations, Rodriguez. What would you do differently if you encountered a similar situation in the future?" He thought for a moment. "I would ask for identification immediately. I wouldn't make any assumptions about rank or authorization based on appearance, and I would verify credentials through proper channels before making any determinations about someone's right to be in a secure area." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right, and I want you to remember something else. Your instinct to challenge an unknown person was correct. Don't let this morning's embarrassment make you hesitant to do your job. The key is to do it professionally and thoroughly." The afternoon session focused on practical integration of cybersecurity measures with special operations planning. Sarah demonstrated how real-time cyber intelligence could be integrated with tactical decision-making, showing examples from recent operations where such integration had proven decisive. As she spoke, she became aware that something extraordinary was happening in the room. The traditional barriers between branches of service, ranks, and specializations were dissolving. Officers were collaborating on questions, sharing insights from their own experiences, and building on each other's observations in ways that rarely occurred in formal military settings. General Patterson, who had been observing from the back of the room, approached during the final break. "Colonel, I've been in the military for 32 years. And I've never seen a briefing session generate this level of cross-functional engagement. You've accomplished something remarkable here today." "The credit belongs to the personnel in this room, General. They're the ones asking the right questions and making the connections. I'm just providing information and facilitating the discussion." That humility again, he smiled. "But I want you to know that this morning's incident, embarrassing as it was initially, has turned into one of the most valuable learning experiences this facility has ever hosted. The way you've handled it has earned you tremendous respect throughout the command." As the final session concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by personnel wanting to continue discussions, exchange contact information, and explore how her insights might be applied to their specific units and missions. The energy in the room was electric, the kind of intellectual excitement that occurred when practical people discovered new tools that could make them more effective. The evening concluded with an informal gathering in the facility's officer club. Sarah had initially planned to return to her hotel, but the enthusiastic invitations from multiple unit commanders convinced her to stay. The conversations continued, ranging from technical discussions about cyber warfare to broader questions about military culture and adaptation. Late in the evening, as the gathering began to wind down, General Williams approached her with a serious expression. "Colonel, I want to share something with you. This afternoon I received a call from the Pentagon. Word of today's events has reached the highest levels of military leadership. The way you handled this morning's incident and the quality of today's briefings has generated interest in expanding your role in strategic planning." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of expansion, General?" "The kind that would involve regular briefings to the Joint Chiefs and direct advisory roles in major operational planning. Your work has already influenced policy at the highest levels, but there's interest in making that influence more formal and direct." The implications were significant. Such a role would represent a major advancement in her career, but it would also mean leaving behind the more hands-on technical work that she genuinely enjoyed. "I appreciate the opportunity, General, but I'll need time to consider the implications. My current work allows me to stay close to the technical details that inform strategic thinking. I want to ensure that any new role wouldn't separate me from that foundation." "That's exactly the kind of response that makes you valuable for this level of responsibility," Williams replied. "Take all the time you need to decide. The opportunity will be there when you're ready." As Sarah finally returned to her hotel late that evening, she reflected on the extraordinary day. It had begun with an embarrassing case of mistaken identity and evolved into something that might change the trajectory of her entire career. The four-general salute that morning had been unprecedented, but it was the response of the junior personnel throughout the day that had been most meaningful. They had engaged with her ideas, challenged her assumptions, and demonstrated the kind of intellectual curiosity and professional flexibility that would serve them well in an increasingly complex military environment. The incident with Petty Officer Rodriguez had become a teaching moment, not just about assumptions and protocol, but about the importance of continuous learning and adaptation. In a rapidly changing world, the military's greatest strength would come from its ability to question its own assumptions and remain open to unexpected sources of knowledge and insight. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah realized that regardless of what decision she made about future roles, today had reminded her why she had chosen military service in the first place. It wasn't about rank or recognition. It was about working with dedicated professionals who were committed to protecting their country and constantly improving their ability to do so effectively. The story that would emerge from this day would undoubtedly grow in the telling. The image of four generals saluting a colonel who had been mistaken for a lost civilian would become part of military legend. But for Sarah, the real significance lay in the reminder that effective leadership meant being willing to learn from anyone, respect expertise regardless of its source, and maintain the humility to acknowledge when assumptions proved wrong. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but today had reinforced her confidence that the military remained an institution capable of recognizing merit, adapting to change, and learning from its mistakes. That adaptability would be crucial in facing the complex threats and opportunities of an increasingly interconnected world.